Well, it just seems like a few years ago, maybe even a couple of days ago, we were dedicating my oldest daughter, Sawyer, up here. It's crazy. The time flies, man. Those of you who've had children, you understand. You look back and you go, man, that went fast. It goes so quick. I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful for our little church family here because we talk about all this stuff all the time and here in what we call big church in my house. I don't know if that's what y'all call it. We call it big church. And then they have the kids ministry down there. And our kids team is really always working with the kids. They've got different memory verses that they're memorizing. They've got different challenges that they do. They even serve together. They learn how to do these missional serving projects together. I'm always so thankful for our kids ministry. And I thank you for, even if you don't have a kid down there, thank you for supporting them, like when you give or when you bring supplies for them. That's so huge because they learn a lot of these things, a lot of the things that you want them to learn about God, about Jesus, about how to follow. Like they're learning them down there. And they're also pumping out these different articles to you and ideas for you throughout the week, different things you can do to continue the conversation at home because we want parents and families to be discipling children at home too. It's a partnership that we do this whole thing. As I was looking at Ellie as she's in her dress, I was remembering Sawyer a little bit. You know, Sawyer, when she went to school and she started talking, all the teachers started saying, hey, that kid talks a lot. And I said, yeah, I know, yeah. And they said, but it's okay. She's not just jabbering on. She actually has things to say. And not only that, she's calling us out for different things that we do. I said, what do you mean? I said, well, she makes us act right. So what? So they laugh about it. You know, they weren't annoyed by it. They were laughing about it. So if they did something wrong or they said it was the wrong day or something, she would point it out to them and say, no, that's not right. Today is pizza day or something, you know, or like that. And I was like, not my sweet angel. She would never do that, right? Until it happened to me at home one day. She says, we were talking one day and I said, you're going to do this, this, and this. And she says something else. And I said, hey, we're going to go do this. And she says, no, Daddy, we don't do that. I said, hey, I'll do whatever I want to. I made you. And she goes, straight face. Daddy, you didn't make me. God made me. Well, okay then, you know. It's fine. And she's learning that in our kids ministry area, and she's learning that at home as we're talking about these sort of things. But it's an important truth to understand. Like, yes, God made me. And it's one of the reasons we're kind of walking through this series for the next few weeks that we've started. It's called Very Good. Because when God looked at all of the things that God had made, including you, God said it was very good. The creation was very good. The trouble is, though, I think a lot of us, if we're being honest, disagree with that sentiment. Like, we're not going to disagree with God, but maybe we'll challenge him a little bit on that. Because when we look at the world, and we look at the things that we see in the news, on social media, the things we hear about, the things that are texted to us, the things that are texted about us. Like we look at stuff, we look at the death, we look at the destruction, we look at the disease that also appears in this world, and we go, very good? Like maybe, somewhat good maybe, but very good? You think this is a very good place? And what I'm noticing more and more, maybe you do too if you pay attention, is that there's a lot of people who are beginning to withdraw. They're beginning to withdraw, maybe not from everybody and everything, but they're not as active in the world maybe as they once were or as they were taught to be. These are a lot of the people who they never do anything that they don't absolutely have to do. Like they don't go to anywhere except for work. They used to go to work, go to church, they would hang out with friends, and now they just go to work and they come home and they watch more and more of their favorite news programs. Or they sit at home on their phone and they just doom scroll all night. And everything that they read, everything that they watch confirms their bias about how bad the world is, and it's only getting worse. And what happens is a lot of them, because they feel traumatized by the world, end up getting angry at everybody. Not just angry at the people who disagree with them, although they're very mad at them, but they're angry at the world in general. And every slight offense feels like a massive swing to the face. everything is terrible, everything is awful. And if you disagree with them, they're just going to cut you off and they're not going to have anything to do with you. But what if it didn't have to be this way? What if it doesn't have to be this way? And what if this isn't how we're designed to live? What if instead we decided to believe God when God said this thing was very good? And that we could approach the world in that way as if it was very good. What would change in your life, in your family, in your neighborhood, in your community? What could change if we approached everybody and everything as if it really was very good? Which brings us to another question, a deeper question, a more foundational question, a question that all of us ask at some point. Why am I here? Why am I here? If this world is what so many people think it is, that it's not this good place, it's not made up of good people, why am I here? Even if it is very good, why? Why would God do this? And to answer that question, I think we have to go back to the beginning. In Genesis, the first book of the Bible, we read the story of creation. And in that creation account, God starts saying, hey, there's nothing here. I'm going to create things out of thin air. Just boom, here it is. And God uses a lot of words like this. He starts by saying things like, let there be, right? A famous phrase, let there be light. You're familiar, good. You're Bible scholars already. Let there be light. There's also things like let the waters get separated from the land, let the animals start doing this, let this happen. So there's like, let there be and let the. So God creates all of this life, all the planets, all the stars, all the sea lions, all the turtles, all the stuff. And then we see this. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. That's different. That's just a little bit different, isn't it? Notice something here. This isn't a random thing. This isn't God just filling out the world. This is God making people. God making humanity on purpose. This isn't random. This isn't just something that he had to do, felt obliged to do. God is making people, God is making humanity on purpose. I mean, did you catch that there, though? There wasn't a let there be or let this happen. God said, let us make. Let us make. This is an intentional act by an intentional and relational God. A God that has existed in relationship within the Trinity for eternity. Always has, currently is, always will be. This God exists in relationship. And this God is creating in that same way, in that same capacity. What that means for us, what that means for me, and what that means for you is that you matter. Not because I say so, not because you have earned it, not because you have this worth, because you're a great athlete, or because you make a lot of money, or your house is really big or really clean, or because you're very creative or anything like that. You have great and immense and immeasurable worth because the God of the universe says so. Because you're made in God's image. There it is. Just because you are made in God's image, you reflect God. For that reason, you have immeasurable worth. But that's not all God has to say on the subject. Here's what we see happens next. So, God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, just in case you forgot. Male and female, he created them. So God says, let us make humanity in our image, and we're going to make them in our image. Here we are making them in our image, male and female, in our image. Now this is where it kind of gets real, isn't it? This is where it gets a little bit real. God doesn't just say, all right, let's throw some humans out there, and they're all going to be the exact same. No, instead, God gives two distinct expressions of his image. Two distinct expressions of humanity, male and female, and both equally bear God's image. Both are equally bearing God's image. Both are reflecting his glory. Both are made for his purpose. not one better than the other. That in some corners of the world, and maybe even in our own country, still to this day, we hear of people talking about women as if they are some kind of second-class humanity. But that couldn't be further from the truth, especially when you look at how God created people. That they are equal. And they both reflect God's glory and God's purposes equally. Your maleness or your femaleness is not a limitation. It's not a mistake. None of that. It's a gift from the God of the universe to reflect God's glory back into the world. Now, when we talk about image, we need to be careful to make sure that we're all talking about the same thing, right? It doesn't mean that we are physically looking like God. It doesn't mean that we physically resemble God in that capacity. I mean, we just talked about there's male and female. What we can also ascertain from this very thing is that God is not a man necessarily, although we often give male pronouns here. God is not a man, nor is God a woman. But somehow these things come from him. When we talk about being made in God's image, though, we can talk clearly about a few things. One of them is we have reason. Here's how we're made in God's image. We have reason. We're able to think. We're able to use logic, to rationalize things. We're able to be creative. Like, we have reason. This is what it looks like to be made in God's image. It also looks like this. We have relationships. God has existed eternally in the Trinity in relationship. We have relationships. We are relational beings. When we don't have relationships, meaningful relationships in our life, what happens? We get depressed. We don't know what we're doing with ourselves. And life doesn't have, it isn't a very high quality at that point. We crave relationships. It's one of the reasons we push you to serve on teams and connect in groups here at Church on the Drive, because we crave relationships so much, and those are easy ways to get plugged in with other people. Thirdly, we have responsibility. So God makes all this stuff, and then he creates humanity, and humanity's job is to rule over all of these things. Go back and read Genesis 1:26 through 1:31. Humanity's job is to rule over all this, to be a good steward of these things too. We have responsibility. Well, God made the world. God made everything in it. Of course. Of course, God is responsible for us. God is responsible for the world. But God is inviting us to be part of that too. God says, I want you to come be these co-creators with me. So you have a responsibility for all these animals, for all of this creation, for your brother and for your sister, those around you. Finally, we have resemblance. We reflect God's character in things like love, things like justice, mercy, and creativity. We resemble God in those moments. We resemble God with those things. Now, this is all, I think, painfully evident when we start thinking about how we reflect God and how we bear the image of God. But the question we still come back to, because that's the how, is why am I here? Why did God do this? Why did God create me and you and all these people for these things? Why did God create us to help co-create in all of this stuff? Well, you and I were created in God's image. We were created in God's image to glorify God. That may sound a little bit strange at first, as if God needed our glory. But at our basic level, everything and everyone who has ever been created was legitimately created to reflect back God's glory. I mean, think about it. If God exists, and I believe he does, and I think most of you do too, but even if you don't, think about it theoretically. If God exists, then that God has to be the greatest being that anyone has ever conceived of. In fact, that God has to be greater than that. Otherwise, we're not talking about God. So if we're talking about the greatest being that could be conceived of, what we're talking about is a being that is all-knowing, a being that is all-powerful, and I believe also all good. totally beneficent, because all good has to come from this being. Good has to come from somewhere. All good has to come from this being. And we believe that God is holy and different than us in that way. And so all of this good is coming from God. Now, if there is this being out there that is all good, all knowing, and all powerful, then this same being must be the only being that is totally worthy of everyone and everything's praise. Everything else's honor. So if we're supposed to glorify God, if you're like me, sometimes you got to go back and you got to look up words, because we use words like glory a lot and glorify a lot, and we lose the meaning in there sometimes. We just assume everybody's talking like we are. But here's what we mean. Admiration, or glory means to admiration or honor someone gets for doing something great. Pretty simple. If this great, big God that is bigger and better than anything we could really wrap our minds around exists, then that God is worthy of glory. That God is worthy of our glory. So we glorify that God. We praise, right? So if somebody runs into a burning building and brings 2 or 3 people out, we glorify them, right? We glorify them and we say, isn't that so great? Aren't they so wonderful? Aren't they so brave? Because of what they did. We do this for God because God is the only one who could have created anything and anyone out of thin air, just by saying so. We glorify God for that very reason. So, the problem is, we were created to be mirrors, and a lot of times instead, we want to be the main characters. We understand intellectually that God is supposed to receive our praise. We even know instinctively God is supposed to receive our praise, that we are supposed to be glorifying God with our lives, with our words, with our actions, all of that stuff. The problem is we want to be the ones receiving the praise so often. We were made to reflect. We were made to be mirrors of God's glory. And instead we try to be the main character. And what ends up happening is that we end up looking like this. Instead of looking like a regular mirror, we look like a funhouse mirror. We were walking around in Ripley's, believe it or not, a few months ago on vacation, and we come around the corner, and there's this funhouse mirror there. And you can tell it's just kind of bent out of shape and a little bit wonky and stuff. And I found myself thinking about my gym back here in College Park. So I go to the gym in the morning, and there's this one squat rack that's right there. And I use this particular squat rack for one reason and one reason only. It's because there is a fan that blows directly on it. And I get so hot. It's like a dog sticking his head out the window. You know, I'm just like, ugh. So I go to do my squats, right? You got to get a wide base, get it right, get your legs pointed just right. And directly in front of me, though, is a mirror. And when I first started working out at this gym doing squats in that squat rack, I never had a mirror in front of me while I was doing the squats. And so you normally find a place up high and you fixate on it, okay? Watch that as you go down, go up, and you're feeling it out as you go down, making sure it's right. But I have a mirror in front of me, so I want to make sure my form is correct. Well, as I'm looking at myself doing this, my form is not as correct as I thought it would be. It looks like I'm leaning to my left a little bit, just a little bit, and I'm going. And so I decide I'm going to compensate by leaning to my right just a little bit more. I'm like, that doesn't feel right. But you know, like from time to time, like we do things and it feels right to us, but it looks weird to everybody else. Right? You ever seen somebody who runs, like one arm stays here and the other's doing this like this? They have no idea. They've just been doing it their whole life, so it feels normal. So I figured it's one of those things. It wasn't. Because like a few days later, I'm there at the gym and I'm standing by that mirror putting something down, and I look and I realize that this big mirror has just been hung a little bit wonky. Just a little bit wonky, and it's making this one part bow a little bit. And so actually, my form was a lot better than that mirror told me it was. It was a little bit like that funhouse mirror back at Ripley's. See, we were created to be mirrors of God's glory. to reflect God's glory. But what happened is when we decide to be self-centered, when we decide to serve ourselves, when we decide that we're the main character, our mirror gets distorted. It gets hung a little bit wonky. It gets dirt all over it. You can't really see it. And the thing is, like, you can still see some things in one of those funhouse mirrors really well. You can still see a lot of stuff in there. It doesn't look like it's supposed to look. You can still see some, and you can explain it in a way, no, it's a perfectly good mirror. It's perfectly fine. The reality, though, is it needs to be fixed. It needs to be cleaned up. It needs to be set right. And that's exactly what Jesus does. When we say yes to Jesus, we make Jesus the king of our life. When we say, I'm going to follow Jesus with everything I have, what happens is Jesus starts fixing that mirror back up so that we reflect God's glory back to God the way that we're meant to do. We reflect and glorify God in the way that we're supposed to do. And here's the thing, when that happens, we're living our best life. When you live the way that you were created to live, the way that God designed you to live, you are at your happiest. You really are. You're at your happiest. The happiest people I know, and statistically, we're finding this out in study after study after study, is that the ones who have committed to following Jesus in the way that we're supposed to follow Jesus, not like a mean-spirited way where we're trying to make everybody mad all the time, but when you commit to following Jesus and being together with a faith community week in and week out, those are the happiest people in America. The studies show it. So today, here's what we've said. God created us, male and female, in his own image to glorify him. That's why you exist. That's why I exist. That's why we exist. That's what we're doing here. So what? What do we do with that information? How does that change anything for me? Well, the first thing I think it means is you matter because God says so. You matter. If you've ever wondered, will anybody ever miss me if I'm gone? Yes. Do I matter at all in this world? There's 8 billion people in this world. Do I matter? Yes. Absolutely. You are of infinite value, not just to me, but to the God of the universe. God says you matter. Don't ever doubt it. But it also means other people matter just as much. The people in your family, your weird aunt, whoever, no names, they matter. That neighbor, he matters too. Those people who make you mad because they never return their shopping cart to the place, they matter. But let's take it even crazier, right? Terrorists matter. They matter to God. They're made in the image of God. Dictators, they matter to God. They're made in the image of God. People who hurt children matter to God. They're made in the image of God. It's easy to say everybody in this room matters to God. It's hard to say the people that we don't like, the ones we find distasteful, the ones we wish would just kind of disappear. But it's true. They matter just as much as you do. They matter just as much as I do to the God of the universe. And there's room for redemption in their life. All that being said, the third thing is you should reflect God's glory. Your life, everything you do, everything you don't do, what you choose to spend your time doing, what you choose to stay away from doing, should reflect God's glory. That's the question you have to ask yourself today. What am I doing with my life? Am I reflecting God's glory with my life, with the way that I talk to my family, to my friends, to the people in the grocery store? When I don't get great service at the restaurant? Am I reflecting God's glory with my life? Your life should reflect God's glory. Because here's the thing, you weren't just put here to survive for 80 to 100 years and then be done. You were meant to shine with the brilliance of God's love in this universe. You were meant to shine with the brilliance of God's goodness in the universe. Why don't you do that? Why don't you do that? That's my prayer for you today and every day. Maybe today, maybe this morning, you've forgotten a little bit about who you are. If that's you, I want you today to hear me say this. Let today be the day that you let God define you. Nobody else. Not me. God. Remember who you are. And remember that God says you are very good. Let's pray together. God, thank you that we are not random or accidental. Thank you that we were made in your image, that we were made on purpose. Thank you that we were made to reflect back to you how awesome you are. Lord, help us to see ourselves and to see each other as image bearers. And help us to live from that truth today. I pray for all those listening to the sound of my voice that they would make the choice to follow you and to glorify you with their lives, with everything that they've got. We know that it's only possible because of your Son, Jesus. Amen.